The Rebellion of the Three Princesses, Love, Courage and Justice. In a land bathed in golden sunlight, where the trees grew tall and the rivers flowed with song, there was a village so enchanting that it seemed to have come straight out of a painting. This village was home to King Chima, a monarch beloved by all, whose wisdom and kindness touched the lives of every inhabitant. His big heart overflowed with compassion, and he made everyone feel happy and safe. King Chima had a large and loving family, with 2 wives. The first, Uli, gave him 3 daughters, princesses who were the image of beauty, radiant as the rising sun. His second wife, Oluchi, gave him 2 sons, strong and brave princes, destined to one day rule their father's lands. The 3 princesses were known for their joy and playful nature. Every day, they left the palace with their joyful laughter, running through the fields and playing in the rivers. They loved getting dirty, getting their clothes wet and feeling free. Their dresses got dirty and their hair got tangled, but that never bothered them, because they were happy. However, not everyone thought this behavior was appropriate for princesses. Some murmured that they were too wild. "Why don't they act like real princesses?" they asked. These words reached Uli, the girl's mother, who was concerned about her daughter's behavior. "Mothers, you're princesses," said Uli firmly. "It's time to behave according to your position." But the princesses just laughed, not caring. Their hearts were free and full of desire to explore the world around them. They wanted to experience life in a unique way, far from the royal obligations and rigid customs that society expected of them. While people spoke ill of them, calling them stupid for not following the expected behavior, the princesses continued to have fun. For them, being true to themselves was more important than wearing a crown or following imposed rules. Every year, the village held a big festival. It was a grand event, where young people from all over the region came to show off their skills and dance to the vibrant music. The festival was also an opportunity for the princess sisters to choose their suitors, people who might be worthy of marrying them. However, that year, the princesses were sitting at the top of the palace tower, watching the festival from the window. Their hearts were far from glamour and gold, completely indifferent to the expectations the world had of them. The festival was at its peak and the palace was buzzing with excitement. Every year, the event brought together young people from all corners of the kingdom, their eyes eagerly waiting for a chance to get close to the princesses. The most handsome and noble young men prepared to dance, sing and perform, hoping to catch the girls' attention and win their hearts. But inside the palace, the princesses continued to watch in silence, without showing the slightest interest in the festivities below. They liked freedom, adventure, and didn't feel bound by a traditional role. For them, what really mattered was the love of life, the pleasure of being together without the restrictions of royalty. Uli, observing her daughter's carefree attitude, felt enormous concern. She knew that the fate of the princesses was intertwined with the fate of the kingdom. Their choice would not only affect their own lives, but also the future of the dynasty. The obligations were heavy, and they were moving away from their traditional role. The pressure to conform to court standards and what was expected of them was growing. King Chima, who had always believed in his daughter's freedom and happiness, was also torn. He knew that his daughters were growing up and, in time, would have to make decisions that would affect the future of the kingdom. He loved them deeply, but feared that their independence and free spirit might lead them to make the wrong choices. The conflict was growing. The princesses were in an internal dilemma. Should they follow convention, marry princes from other kingdoms and bring in political alliances to strengthen the kingdom's position? Or should they follow their hearts and continue to live their own way, defying everyone's expectations of them? As the festival progressed, something unexpected happened. A young vendor, who no one knew to be a noblewoman, approached the palace with a basket of flowers and fresh fruit. She danced in the center of the square with grace and spontaneity, enchanting everyone around her. The princesses watched in silence, their hearts touched by the purity of the dance and the unassuming joy of the vendor. Perhaps freedom didn't lie in rules, but in the courage to be who you really are. The moment of the young saleswoman's dance was like a snap in the princesses' hearts. Something inside them changed. They realized that perhaps what they were looking for wasn't the grandeur or luxuries that the kingdom offered, but something simpler and more authentic. The saleswoman danced with such passion and without fear of being judged that her actions reverberated in the hearts of the princesses. In that instant, they felt a desire to connect with ordinary people, to experience a life without the barriers imposed by nobility. As the festival continued, a foreign prince from a distant kingdom approached the princesses. He was the kind of man everyone expected them to choose: rich, powerful, with impeccable posture and stunning good looks. He brought lavish gifts and spoke of faraway lands, of the riches and glory he could offer. However, as he looked at the princesses, he noticed that they were distant and disconnected, more focused on the people dancing and the simple stories than on the glitter of the crowns and jewels. The princesses looked at the prince and, for a moment, their minds were filled with doubt. Should they follow the path that society expected of them, marry a prince who would bring political advantages to the kingdom and follow the legacy of their mothers and father? Or should they follow the path of the heart, the path that would lead them to a simple but free life full of discoveries? The prince, seeing their indifference, decided to get closer and tease them. "You're princesses. Don't behave like fools. There's much more at stake here than your childish games," he said arrogantly. But his words didn't resonate with the princesses as he had hoped. Instead, something in their eyes sparkled. They were tired of expectations, tired of having to mold themselves to please. Their lives couldn't be a performance, couldn't be a show to entertain others. They wanted to find something more, something that was real. It was then that, unexpectedly, the young saleswoman, who was dancing with the people in the center of the square, appeared in front of them. With a shy smile, she bowed respectfully and said, "King Chima, princesses, life is more than titles and wealth. True treasure lies in people's hearts, in untold stories and in the freedom to follow who we are." Upon hearing these words, the prince smiled disdainfully and walked away. But the princesses remained silent. Something inside them had definitely changed. That evening, the princesses sat in the palace garden and reflected on what they had seen and heard. The young saleswoman's message echoed in their minds. The pressure to conform to the court's expectations was great, but they finally understood that this was not what would make them happy. They needed to be true to themselves, and that meant choosing a path that might be different from everything the world expected of them. In the heart of the night, when the palace was silent and the stars lit up the sky like a blanket of diamonds, the princesses gathered secretly in the castle gardens. Their hearts were filled with emotion, but also with a sense of freedom they had never experienced before. They could no longer ignore the inner call that drove them to seek something greater, something more genuine. With newfound confidence, the princesses made a bold decision. They could no longer live in the shadow of the kingdom's expectations. They needed to discover for themselves what it meant to be a real princess, and not in the pages of history books or in gilded palaces, but in everyday life, in contact with people, in the sweat of work and in the truth of who they really were. "Let's go," said the eldest of the princesses, Amina, with a flame in her eyes. "Let's go on an adventure. Let's see the world with our own eyes and not with the eyes of people who expect us to be something we're not." "Yes," exclaimed the other two princesses, Kemi and Imani, with beaming smiles. The decision was made, and the excitement in the air was palpable. They needed nothing more than courage and a desire to be free. The next day, disguised in simple clothes and without their royal trappings, they fled the palace, their hearts beating fast with excitement and adrenaline coursing through their veins. The adventure was about to begin. The princesses traveled to distant villages, living with the local people, sharing simple meals and laughing like never before. They spent nights under the starry sky, warming themselves around campfires, listening to stories from travelers and storytellers. Nothing made them happier than being there, away from the crowns, free from judgment. They became one with the people, discovering the value of humility and simplicity. But their journey was far from easy. At one point, they came across a warrior tribe that was suspicious of outsiders. It was a tense situation where their lives hung in the balance. But instead of backing down, the princesses used their wisdom and enchantment to win the tribe's trust. They proved themselves worthy by showing respect and intelligence, talking to the elders and sharing the knowledge they had learned from their own people. The tribe, impressed by their courage and sincerity, welcomed them, and the princesses began to realize the impact they had not just as royalty, but as human beings with the power to change lives. They were no longer just princesses, they were leaders in their own right. In one of the villages they visited, the princesses heard about a major crisis threatening the people. A severe drought was affecting the crops, and famine was spreading. Without hesitation, they used their skills, acquired on their travels, to help the community, teaching them new irrigation techniques and providing resources they had brought from their own lands. The people welcomed them with open arms, and the princesses realized that their true mission was not to rule with a crown, but to inspire, help, and bring real solutions. But while the princesses dedicated themselves to changing the fate of those in need, King Chima, distressed by his daughter's absence, learned of the escape. He was desperate, but at the same time he understood that the princesses were doing something far greater than any party or wedding could provide. He knew that, contrary to what traditions had taught him, his daughters were becoming truly powerful. It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. The foreign prince they had rejected, who had shown himself to be arrogant and full of himself, appeared again. This time, however, he didn't bring riches or titles. He brought a radical proposal. I've seen what the princesses are doing. I've seen their courage, their willingness to help. I've seen what it means to be a true leader. I want to be part of that. I want to fight alongside you and help you build something that lasts, something that really matters. The prince was offering something no one expected, not a political alliance or a marriage, but a true partnership based on respect and trust. He was ready to fight for a different world, alongside the princesses. The princesses, now immersed in the life of the people and the hard work of the villages, were beginning to understand the true power of leadership. They were more united than ever, with their hearts and minds focused on a single mission, to help save the kingdom from drought and famine. The foreign prince, who had proved worthy of their trust, joined forces with them, bringing with them knowledge of advanced agricultural techniques and methods to improve food production. But just as they were about to achieve their greatest feat, an unknown threat arose. A group of greedy merchants who had spread throughout the kingdom, commanding the price of food and causing suffering to the people, decided that the princesses and the prince could not succeed in their endeavors. They knew that if the princesses triumphed, they would lose their control over the market and the wealth. These merchants, led by a ruthless man, arrived at the village with an army of armed men, ready to destroy the crops and any hope of change. They took over the village fields, threatening to kill anyone who opposed them. Tensions grew, and soon the princesses realized that they faced a battle that was not just for the survival of the people, but for their own freedom. The prince, who now felt part of the cause, prepared himself alongside the princesses. They knew they had to act quickly to prevent the merchants' greed from destroying everything they had worked for. It was a dark, moonless night when the confrontation took place. The princesses, now with the support of the people and the prince, prepared for the fight. They knew they could not win with strength alone, but with cunning, strategy, and unity. The battle would not be just physical, but a fight for justice, freedom, and the right to live without oppression. The princesses, riding horses they had learned to tame during their journey, led the attack. They used their skills to disarm the merchants and weaken their line of defense. In a bold move, Amina, the eldest of the princesses, confronted the merchant leader in a tense duel, using her wits and courage to overcome brute force. She fought not only for the kingdom, but for the freedom of all, including herself. Meanwhile, Kemi and Imani, with the help of the prince, organized the defense of the villages and rescued the inhabitants who were being threatened. The battle intensified, but the princesses were no longer alone. The people, inspired by their courage and determination, united, fighting alongside them. At the climax of the battle, the tension reached its peak. Amina, in a decisive move, managed to disarm the leader of the merchants and force him to surrender, proving that true strength does not lie in weapons alone, but in unity and justice. With this, the merchants were defeated and expelled from the kingdom, and peace was restored. The people celebrated the victory, and the princesses felt a deep relief. But more important than the military victory, they realized the power of their actions. They were no longer princesses following an imposed tradition, but real leaders who had earned the respect and admiration of all for their valor and kindness. After the great battle, peace finally returned to the kingdom. The princesses, now true leaders in their own right, were welcomed as heroes. But more important than the crowns or the applause, they had won something far more precious: the trust of the people and the understanding that being a princess did not mean conforming to a pre-established image, but living according to one's own values and truth. The foreign prince who had joined them not only earned the respect of the princesses, but also of the people. He was no longer seen simply as an outsider seeking power, but as a genuine ally. Together, the princesses and the prince worked to transform the kingdom, promoting prosperity, respect for the people's traditions, and the freedom to choose one's own path. The kingdom prospered, the villages flourished again, and the princesses continued to be leaders dedicated to the well-being of their people, always guided by deep compassion and an unwavering will to do good. The fight against drought and greed had been won, but the real victory was in their hearts, in the strength of unity and the ability to change destiny. Years passed, and the kingdom flourished. The people still spoke of the courage of the three princesses who were not afraid to follow their hearts. The foreign prince, now a royal advisor, found his place at their side, helping to govern wisely. Together, they had built a new era where everyone, regardless of their birth, could live with dignity and hope. And so, the princesses became living legends, not because they were women who conformed to the rules of the world, but because they dared to write their own stories and, in doing so, changed the world around them. In the calm of an afternoon, the princesses, now mature and full of wisdom, walked through the fields that had once been devastated by drought, but were now green and vibrant. They looked at each other, smiling, knowing they had found something much greater than the crown they once thought they needed. And so ended the story of the three princesses, but the legend of their courage, wisdom, and freedom would live forever, passed down from generation to generation, remembered by all as an example that true power lies in living with authenticity and courage.